My name is Evelyn, and I am 78 years old. As I sit here in my small apartment, looking at the faded photographs scattered across my coffee table, I can still feel the weight of what happened to me all those years ago. The betrayal, the manipulation, the complete destruction of everything I had worked so hard to build. You see, when you're young and in love, you believe that the person you've chosen to spend your life with sees you for who you are. You believe they love your soul, your heart, your dreams. But sometimes, and I learned this the hardest way possible, some people only see dollar signs when they look at you. They see opportunity. They see a bank account to drain, a future to steal, and a life to destroy. My husband, John, was one of those people. And for 23 years, I was too blind, too trusting, and too in love to see it. I was born in 1947 in a small town in Ohio. My parents were hardworking people who taught me the value of every penny earned through honest labor. My father worked at the steel mill, coming home each night covered in soot and sweat, while my mother took in laundry from the neighbors to make ends meet. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and that was enough. From a young age, I was determined to build a better life. I studied hard, worked part-time jobs throughout high school, and saved every cent I could. By the time I was 22, I had put myself through secretarial school and landed a job at a law firm in Cleveland. It wasn't glamorous work, but I was good at it, and slowly I began to climb the ladder. By 30, I had become the office manager, overseeing a staff of 15 people. I had my own apartment, a modest savings account, and for the first time in my life, I felt secure. I had built something from nothing, and I was proud of it. My parents, who had passed by then, would have been proud too. That's when John walked into my life. He was 35, with dark hair that fell perfectly across his forehead, and a smile that could light up any room. He came to our law firm as a client, dealing with some business contracts for a venture he was starting. From the moment he walked through those glass doors, I was captivated. John had a way of making you feel like you were the only person in the world when he spoke to you. His eyes would lock onto yours, and he would lean in slightly, as if every word you said was the most important thing he'd ever heard. He was charming, intelligent, and ambitious. Everything I thought I wanted in a partner. Our courtship was a whirlwind. He would show up at my office with flowers, take me to fancy restaurants I could never afford on my own, and whisper promises of the beautiful future we would build together. He told me about his dreams, his plans for business ventures that would make us wealthy beyond our wildest dreams, and I, fool that I was, believed every word. We married in 1981, in a small ceremony at the courthouse. John said he didn't want to waste money on a big wedding when we could invest it in our future instead. It made sense to me at the time. After all, I was practical, and I appreciated that he seemed to be too. But looking back now, I see it for what it was. The first red flag in a sea of red flags that I would spend the next 2 decades ignoring. You might wonder why I'm telling you this story now, after all these years. Why dig up old wounds? Why relive the pain? The answer is simple, because somewhere out there, there's another woman, or man, who is living through what I lived through. Someone who is being slowly drained of their resources, their self-worth, and their future by a person who claims to love them. Someone who needs to hear that it's not their fault, that they're not stupid or weak for trusting someone they loved, that there is life after betrayal, even when it feels like everything has been taken from you. This is my story, but it's also a warning. It's a testament to the fact that financial abuse is real, that emotional manipulation can happen to anyone, and that sometimes the person sharing your bed is the one plotting your downfall. As I share the details of my marriage, of how John systematically destroyed everything I had built, I want you to know that this isn't a story of defeat. Yes, I lost my money. Yes, I lost years of my life. Yes, I lost my faith and love for a very long time, but I didn't lose myself. And in the end, that's what saved me. So settle in, dear listener, as I take you through the journey of how I went from a successful, independent woman to a financially devastated shell of my former self, and then, against all odds, found my way back to wholeness. It's not an easy story to tell, and it won't be an easy story to hear. But it's a story that needs to be told. The early days of our marriage were everything I had dreamed they would be. John moved into my apartment, and suddenly, the space that had felt perfect for one felt even more perfect for two. He would wake up early to make me coffee, leaving little notes by the pot that said things like, "For my brilliant wife," or "The woman who makes every day worth living." God, how those notes make me sick now. John had this way of making me feel like I was the center of his universe. When I came home from work, he would be waiting, asking about my day with what seemed like genuine interest. He remembered every detail I told him about office politics, about difficult clients, about my hopes for advancement. He would rub my feet while I talked, nodding and offering advice that always seemed so insightful. "You're too good for that place, Evelyn," he would say, his hands working out the knots in my shoulders. "But don't worry. Once my business takes off, you won't have to work for anyone else ever again. We'll be partners in everything." His business. That's what he called it, though looking back, I realize I never fully understood what it was. Import and export, he said, connecting manufacturers overseas with retailers here in America. He had contacts, he assured me, people who trusted him, deals that were just about to close. In those first months, I watched him work with what I thought was admiration. He would spend hours on the phone, pacing our small living room, speaking in that confident tone that had first attracted me to him. He had a small office set up in the corner of our bedroom, papers spread across a desk I had bought him as a wedding gift. "Just need a little more time to get things off the ground," he would say when I asked how things were going. "You know how business is, honey. It takes money to make money." And that's when it started. So slowly, so carefully, that I didn't even notice the shift. It began with small things. John's car broke down, and he needed $3,000 for repairs. Of course I gave it to him. He was my husband. What was mine was his. Then there was the business dinner he needed to host for potential investors. Could I cover it? Just this once? $2,000 later, he assured me it had gone wonderfully. The investors were interested. Any day now, the money would start rolling in. I remember the first time I felt a flutter of unease. It was 6 months into our marriage, and I was balancing my checkbook. I had always been meticulous about my finances, a habit drilled into me by my parents. But the numbers weren't adding up. I was short. Not by much, just a few $100s. But it bothered me. When I mentioned it to John, he laughed and pulled me into his arms. "You work too hard to worry about every penny," he said, kissing my forehead. "Money is meant to be spent, Evelyn. Enjoyed. What's the point of saving every cent if you never live?" It was such a different philosophy from how I had been raised, but something about the way he said it made sense. Maybe I was too rigid. Maybe I did need to learn to relax, to trust that good things were coming. So I loosened my grip. Just a little at first. When John needed money for office supplies, I gave it without asking for receipts. When he said he needed a new suit for an important meeting, I took him shopping, watching him transform in front of the mirror at the department store. "You see that?" he said, adjusting his tie in the mirror. "That's what success looks like, and it's all thanks to you, my brilliant, beautiful wife." The compliments always came when money was involved. I see that now. But then, oh then, I was so starved for affection, for validation, that I drank them in like water in the desert. By our first anniversary, John's business still hadn't taken off, but he had explanations for everything. The economy was tough. His overseas contacts were dealing with political upheaval. A deal had fallen through at the last minute because of a competitor's underhanded tactics. Always a reason, always someone else's fault. But he had a new plan. A better plan. This one was sure to work. "Real estate," he announced one evening over dinner. "That's where the real money is, Evelyn. Buy low, fix it up, sell high. With your steady income and my business sense, we could make a fortune." He had found a property, he said, a small house on the outskirts of town that just needed a little work. The owner was desperate to sell, and we could get it for a steal. All we needed was the down payment. $20,000. I remember staring at him across the dinner table, my fork frozen halfway to my mouth. $20,000 was nearly half my savings. Money I had worked for over a decade to accumulate. Money that was supposed to be my safety net, my future. "I know it's a lot," John said, reaching across the table to take my hand. But think about it, Evelyn. This is our chance, our opportunity to build something together. Don't you trust me? Those 3 words, don't you trust me? They would become his favorite weapon, though I didn't know it then. Because what wife doesn't trust her husband? What kind of marriage is built on suspicion and doubt? So I gave him the money. The house, when he finally took me to see it, was a disaster. The roof leaked, the foundation was cracked, and there was a suspicious smell coming from the basement that made my eyes water. But John was enthusiastic, pointing out the potential with sweeping gestures. New roof, some foundation work, update the kitchen and bathrooms, and we'll triple our investment, he promised. I've already got contractors lined up. Good guys who owe me favors. We'll get it done cheap. The contractors, it turned out, needed to be paid up front. Another $15,000. Then there were unexpected problems. Mold in the walls, outdated electrical systems, plumbing that needed to be completely replaced. Each problem came with a price tag, and each price tag came with John's reassurances that this was normal, that all renovations had cost overruns, that we just needed to spend a little more to protect our investment. By the time I realized we were in too deep, I had poured $50,000 into that house. My entire savings, plus a loan I had taken out against my retirement account. The house sat there, half renovated, a monument to my stupidity. But John wasn't discouraged. He never was. Just a minor setback, he said, holding me as I cried over my bank statements. We'll figure it out. We always do. You and me against the world, remember? I wanted to believe him. God help me. I wanted so desperately to believe that this was all going somewhere, that the sacrifices meant something, that the man I had married was the partner he claimed to be. So I went back to work, picking up overtime whenever I could. I stopped buying new clothes, stopped going out with friends, stopped doing anything that cost money. Every penny went to John, to his dreams, to our future. And John always had a new plan, a new opportunity. A new sure thing that just needed a little capital to get started. Looking back, I can see the pattern so clearly. The love bombing when he wanted something. The subtle guilt trips when I hesitated. The way he would turn my own values against me, making me feel selfish for wanting to save money, small-minded for questioning his vision. He was building something, all right, but it wasn't a business or a future. He was building a trap, and I was paying for every piece of it. By our 3rd year of marriage, I had become someone I didn't recognize. The confident woman who had once managed an entire law office now second-guessed every decision. The careful saver who had built security from nothing now handed over paychecks without question. But the transformation had been so gradual, so expertly orchestrated, that I couldn't see how far I had fallen. John had perfected his craft by then. He knew exactly which buttons to push, which words would make me crumble, which gestures would keep me hoping. He had studied me like a scientist studies a lab rat, learning my patterns, my weaknesses, my deepest fears. The morning I discovered he had been withdrawing money from my personal account without telling me, I was sitting at my desk at work. I had called the bank to check my balance, planning to pay the electric bill that was already a week overdue. The woman on the phone read the number, and I asked her to repeat it. $342, she said again. That couldn't be right. I had deposited my paycheck just 5 days ago. $2,300. Where had $2,000 gone? My hands shook as I asked her to read the recent transactions. Cash withdrawal, $500. Cash withdrawal, $500. Cash withdrawal, $500. Cash withdrawal, $500. All on different days, all from ATMs near John's supposed office. I left work early, claiming a headache. It wasn't a lie. My skull felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. When I got home, John was there, feet up on the coffee table I had inherited from my grandmother, watching television like he didn't have a care in the world. "You're home early," he said, barely glancing up. "Everything okay?" I stood in the doorway, my purse still clutched in my hands, trying to find the words. How do you accuse your husband of stealing? How do you even think such a thing? The bank account, I finally managed. There's money missing, $2,000. He didn't even flinch, didn't look guilty or surprised. He just sighed, like I was a child who needed something simple explained to her. "Missing?" He laughed, but there was an edge to it. Evelyn, honey, it's not missing. I used it for the business. I told you I had that meeting with the suppliers from China. They needed a good faith deposit. I didn't remember him telling me any such thing. But then again, I had been working so much overtime lately, coming home exhausted. Maybe I had forgotten? You should have asked, I said, my voice smaller than I intended. That's when his face changed. The easy smile disappeared, replaced by something harder. He stood up slowly, walking toward me with deliberate steps. Asked? His voice was quiet, but there was danger in it. I should have asked my wife for permission to run my business. I should have begged for money that's ours, not just yours. That's not what I meant. Isn't it? He was close now, close enough that I could smell the beer on his breath even though it was only 3 p.m. Here I am, working my ass off trying to build something for us, for our future, and you want to treat me like a child who needs an allowance. The tears came then, hot and shameful. We need to pay the bills, John. The electric company is threatening to shut off the power. His face softened immediately, like a switch had been flipped. He pulled me into his arms, stroking my hair as I cried against his chest. Oh, baby, he murmured. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to yell. It's just, do you know how it feels? To have to depend on you for everything? To feel like less of a man because my wife is the breadwinner? I pulled back to look at him, seeing what I thought was genuine pain in his eyes. You're not less of a man, I said. I never thought that. I know you don't mean to make me feel that way, he said, cupping my face in his hands. But when you question every dollar, when you act like I'm wasting money instead of investing it, it hurts, Evelyn. It makes me feel like you don't believe in me. The guilt hit me like a physical blow. Here I was, worried about money while my husband was suffering, feeling emasculated and unsupported. What kind of wife was I? I'm sorry, I whispered. I do believe in you. He kissed my forehead, gentle and loving. I know you do. And I promise this investment is going to pay off. The suppliers just need to see that we're serious. In a few months, we'll be laughing about how worried you were over a measly electric bill. I paid the electric bill with a credit card that day. It was the first time I had ever carried a balance, but John assured me it was temporary, just until the business deal went through. The business deal, of course, fell apart. The suppliers turned out to be unreliable, or they found a better offer, or there was a miscommunication about the terms. The story changed depending on when I asked, but the result was always the same. The money was gone, and there was nothing to show for it. But by then, there was already another opportunity, another sure thing, another investment that would solve all our problems. And the pattern continued. Every time I tried to assert any control over our finances, John would flip the script. I was being controlling. I was being unsupportive. I was acting like his mother instead of his wife. Didn't I understand how hard it was for him? Didn't I see how much pressure he was under? He started staying out later, coming home smelling of alcohol and perfume that wasn't mine. When I confronted him, he turned it around on me again. Can you blame me? He shouted, throwing his keys on the counter so hard they slid off onto the floor. I come home to a wife who looks at me like I'm a failure, who counts every penny like I'm going to steal from her. You think that's attractive? You think that makes me want to be here? I found myself apologizing for driving him away, promising to do better, to trust more, to nag less. I started hiding my concerns, pushing down the growing alarm as our debt mounted and our savings disappeared. The credit cards were maxed out within a year. John had convinced me to add him as an authorized user, saying it would help his credit score for when the business took off. He needed good credit to secure loans, he explained. It was all part of the plan. $27,000 in credit card debt later, I understood that there had never been a plan. Or rather, the plan had always been to drain me dry. But even then, even as the evidence piled up, I couldn't fully accept it. This was my husband, the man who still occasionally brought me flowers, who still, when he wanted something, looked at me like I hung the moon, who still whispered promises in the dark about the beautiful life we would have once everything came together. I started hiding money, small amounts at first, $20 here, $50 there, tucked into an envelope in my underwear drawer. Emergency money, I told myself. Just in case. John found it, of course. He always found everything. "What's this?" he asked one evening, holding up the envelope. $300. It had taken me 2 months to save it. I wanted to have some cash on hand, I stammered. For emergencies. His face was a mask of hurt disappointment. "You're hiding money from me now? What's next, Evelyn? A secret bank account? A divorce lawyer?" "No, John, it's not like that." "Then what is it like?" He sat on the bed, the envelope in his hands, looking for all the world like a man whose heart had just been broken. "We're supposed to be partners. How can we be partners if you're keeping secrets?" I sat beside him, reaching for his hand. He pulled away. "I'm sorry," I said, the words automatic by now. I wasn't thinking. "Of course we're partners." He looked at me for a long moment, then sighed. "I need this for the Morrison deal anyway," he said, pocketing the money. Could have just asked, instead of making me feel like a thief in my own home. The Morrison deal, the Henderson opportunity, the Johnson investment, names and promises that blurred together, each one taking more money, more hope, more of my soul. By the end of our 4th year of marriage, I was working 60-hour weeks just to keep us afloat. John had long since stopped pretending to look for regular work. Why should he reasoned, when his business ventures were so close to paying off? Any day now, any day. I was 40 years old, and I felt like 80, exhausted, broke, and slowly realizing that the trap I was in was one I might never escape. But John wasn't done with me yet. There was still more to take. There's always more to take when someone sees you not as a person, but as a resource to be exploited. The day I discovered John had forged my signature on a loan application, I was at work when the bank called. It was a Thursday afternoon in November, and I remember the exact moment because my hands went so cold I dropped my coffee cup, watching it shatter on the floor like my life was shattering around me. "Mrs. Morrison?" the voice on the phone asked. "This is James from First National Bank. I'm calling to confirm the employment information for your loan application." "What loan application?" My voice came out as a whisper. There was a pause. "The $40,000 business loan you and your husband applied for last week. We just need to verify your income." $40,000. The room spun. "I didn't apply for any loan," I managed to say. Another pause. Longer this time. "Ma'am, I have your signature right here on the application. Perhaps you should come down to the bank and we can sort this out." I left work immediately, my supervisor's concerned calls following me out the door. At the bank, they showed me the paperwork. There it was, my name signed in John's careful forgery. He had been practicing, I realized. All those times I'd seen him doodling while on the phone, he'd been perfecting my signature. The loan officer was sympathetic but firm. My name was on the application. John was listed as co-applicant. As far as they were concerned, we had applied together. "But I didn't sign this," I insisted, my voice breaking. "This is fraud. This is illegal." The officer shifted uncomfortably. "If you're saying your husband forged your signature, that's a criminal matter. You'd need to file a police report, press charges." "Press charges against my husband." The words felt impossible. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing through the implications. $40,000. On top of the maxed-out credit cards, the depleted savings, the loan against my retirement. We were drowning, and John had just tied an anchor to our necks. He was waiting when I got home, sitting at the kitchen table with papers spread out before him. Business plans, he'd call them. Fantasies, I now knew them to be. "You went to the bank," he said. It wasn't a question. "How could you?" My voice was barely controlled fury. "You forged my signature. You committed fraud. With my name." He stood slowly, and for the first time in our marriage, I felt afraid of him. Not physically afraid exactly, but afraid of what he was capable of, what he had already done. "Fraud?" He laughed, but it was ugly. "Is that what you call it when a husband tries to save his family? When a man does whatever it takes to provide?" "Provide? You've destroyed us. We're in debt up to our eyeballs, and now this." "Because you never believed in me." He slammed his hand on the table, making me jump. If you had just supported me from the beginning, given me what I needed instead of making me beg for every dollar, we wouldn't be here." "That's not true." "Isn't it?" He moved closer, his face twisted with rage. "Every step of the way you've doubted me, questioned me, made me feel like a beggar in my own home. So yes, I took matters into my own hands, because someone had to. By forging my signature, by stealing my identity, by doing what needed to be done." He was shouting now. "And you know what? The loan is approved, $40,000 that will finally give me the capital I need to make something happen. So you can either support me or you can destroy us both by going to the police. Your choice, Evelyn." The threat hung in the air between us. If I reported him, he'd be arrested, charged with fraud. Our marriage would be over, and I'd still be on the hook for the loan, still be destroyed financially. I sank into a chair, defeated. "What's the money for?" His face transformed, the rage replaced by excitement. "Restaurant equipment. I found this amazing opportunity. A restaurant that's going out of business. I can buy all their equipment for pennies on the dollar and resell it. We'll double our money in a month." Another scheme, another lie. But what choice did I have now? The $40,000 disappeared as quickly as all the rest. The restaurant equipment deal fell through when the seller found a better offer. Or the equipment was in worse shape than expected. Or there were unexpected storage costs. The story changed, but the result didn't. The money was gone. But John had tasted bigger prey now. Why settle for thousands when you could go for tens of thousands? Why stop at credit cards when there were home equity loans, personal loans, payday lenders? Within 6 months, he had opened lines of credit I didn't even know existed, some in my name, some in his, all draining back to the same empty hole. He intercepted the mail, hid the statements, juggled minimum payments with money he took from my paychecks. I found out about most of them the same way. When the calls started, creditors looking for payment, collection agencies threatening legal action. Each call was another brick in the wall of debt John was building around us. "Hello, I'm looking for Evelyn Morrison regarding her account with Quick Cash Loans." Quick Cash Loans. I'd never heard of them. But apparently, I owed them $5,000 at 39% interest. "This is about your overdue balance with Speedy Financial Solutions." Speedy Financial Solutions. Another $3,000 I didn't remember borrowing. The calls came to my work, to my cell phone, filling my days with shame and dread. My supervisor pulled me aside, concerned about the disruption. My co-workers whispered when they thought I couldn't hear. I confronted John with each new discovery, and each time he had an explanation. He had told me about that loan, didn't I remember? It was for the investment opportunity he'd mentioned last month. Or was it the month before? I was working so much, no wonder I was confused. Maybe I should cut back on the overtime. The stress was clearly getting to me. Gaslighting, I would later learn it was called, making me question my own memory, my own sanity. Was it possible I had forgotten? Was I really so stressed that I was losing track of entire conversations about thousands of dollars? The breaking point came when I tried to use my debit card at the grocery store. Declined. I tried my credit card. Declined. Standing there with a cart full of food, a line of impatient shoppers behind me, I felt something inside me crack. I abandoned the cart and drove to the bank. My checking account was overdrawn by $800. My savings account, which should have had at least $1,000 from my last paycheck, had $12.37. "There must be some mistake," I told the teller, my voice shaking. She pulled up the account history. Cash withdrawals, all from the previous 3 days, all for the maximum daily amount, all using my debit card that I thought was safely in my wallet, but must have been borrowed and returned without my knowledge. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot and cried until I couldn't breathe. 15 years of marriage, and this is what I had become. A woman afraid to buy groceries. A woman whose husband stole from her as easily as breathing. A woman so broken she didn't even know how to fight back anymore. But the worst was yet to come, because John wasn't satisfied with just destroying my present. He had plans for my future too. The morning I discovered John had cashed out my entire retirement account, I was 55 years old. 25 years of careful contributions, employer matches, and compound interest. $387,000 that was supposed to be my security, my future, my peace of mind in old age. Gone. I found out through a letter from the plan administrator, one John had somehow missed in his daily interception of our mail. Confirmation of your retirement account distribution, it read. Full withdrawal. Tax penalties would apply. The check had been issued 2 weeks ago. I called the retirement company with shaking hands, praying it was some kind of mistake. The representative confirmed what I already knew in my heart. Yes, the withdrawal had been processed. Yes, my signature was on file. Yes, the check had been cashed. But I need both signatures, I protested. It's my account from before marriage. How could you process this without talking to me? The representative sounded confused. Ma'am, we did speak with you. I have the notes right here. You called on the 15th, said it was an emergency, that you needed the funds immediately for medical expenses. The 15th. I had been at work all day. John had been home, as always. He had pretended to be me. My husband had literally stolen my voice, my identity, my entire future in a single phone call. I hung up and called in sick to work. Then I did something I had never done before. I went through John's things, his desk, his files, his precious business papers. What I found made me vomit in the wastebasket. Bank statements for accounts I didn't know existed, not in my name, not in his, but in the name of a business he had registered using my social security number. Evelyn Morrison Enterprises. How clever, how thorough. Through this business, he had taken out business loans, opened business credit cards, even leased equipment, all using my information, my credit, my good name that I had spent decades building. The papers showed where the money went, not to suppliers in China or restaurant equipment or real estate renovations, to casinos, to other women whose names appeared on hotel receipts, to cars that were bought and sold within weeks, to a lifestyle he was living while I worked myself to death to pay our bills. But it was the last folder that broke me completely. Divorce papers, already filled out, just waiting for signatures, and a life insurance policy on me, taken out 6 months ago. $500,000 with John as the sole beneficiary. I sat on our bedroom floor, surrounded by evidence of my complete destruction, and I laughed. It was a broken sound, more animal than human, but I couldn't stop. The absurdity of it all. The complete and utter devastation of being played for a fool for so long. When John came home that evening, I was still sitting there, the papers spread around me like a map of my ruined life. He stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene. For just a moment, I saw something flicker across his face. Not guilt, exactly. More like annoyance, like I was a problem he would have to deal with. So you know, he said finally, that was it. No denials. No explanations, no more lies. Just acknowledgement that the game was over. Everything? I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. The retirement account? The business in my name? The insurance policy? He shrugged, actually shrugged, like we were discussing the weather. You were never going to retire anyway. You love working too much. And the insurance? That's just smart planning. Anything could happen. Were you planning to kill me, John? The words came out matter of fact. I was beyond shock, beyond fear, beyond feeling. He laughed. Don't be dramatic. You're worth more to me alive, earning. Though, ... He looked at me with those cold eyes I now realized had always been cold. You're getting older, less valuable. The stress is wearing on you. Who knows what could happen? The threat was so casual, so calm, that it took my breath away. This man, who I had loved, who I had trusted with everything, was discussing my potential death like a business proposition. I want a divorce, I said. Sure, he replied easily. I've already got the papers drawn up. You can have the divorce, but you'll keep the debt, all of it. Every loan, every credit card, every financial obligation. That's the deal. That's not how divorce works. It is when one party has evidence of the other's mental instability, he interrupted. All those times you've been confused about money, forgotten conversations, I've been documenting it. Emails to myself about your concerning behavior, recordings of you contradicting yourself, a paper trail showing you've been making increasingly erratic financial decisions. I stared at him. finally understanding the full scope of what he had done. He hadn't just stolen my money. He had crafted a narrative where I was the unstable one, where my destruction was my own doing. No judge would believe that, I said, but my voice wavered. Want to bet? He smiled, and it was the smile of a predator who had cornered his prey. Successful businessman trying to make ends meet while his wife spirals into debt and delusion? Poor John, stuck with a crazy woman who's destroyed their finances? I'll walk away clean, and you'll be left with nothing but bills and a reputation in ruins. He was right. I could see how it would play out. My exhaustion from working constant overtime would be painted as instability. My protests about missing money would be evidence of paranoia. Every time I had backed down from a confrontation, every time I had apologized to keep the peace, would be twisted into an admission of guilt. Or, he continued, we can do this the easy way. You keep working, keep earning, keep your mouth shut. I'll manage the finances like I always have. We'll stay married on paper. You'll have a roof over your head and food to eat. That's more than you'll have if you fight me. I looked at this stranger wearing my husband's face and felt something inside me die. But in its place, something else was born. Not hope exactly, not strength, but a cold, clear understanding that I would rather have nothing than continue to have him. Get out, I said quietly. He laughed. This is my house too, Evelyn. You can't. Get out! The scream tore from my throat, 15 years of suppressed rage finally finding voice. Get out before I call the police and tell them about the forgery, the fraud, the identity theft. Get out before I burn it all down just to watch you burn with it. For the first time in our marriage, I saw John look genuinely surprised, then calculating. He realized I meant it, that I had reached the point where mutual destruction was preferable to continued slavery. Fine, he said after a long moment. I'll stay with a friend tonight. But this isn't over, Evelyn. You can't win this. After he left, I changed the locks. Then I called a lawyer. Then I called the police. I knew he was right. I couldn't win. Not really. The damage was too complete. The web of lies and debt too intricate to fully untangle. But I could survive. And sometimes, when someone has taken everything else, survival is its own form of victory. The lawyer's office smelled like old leather and defeat. Susan Martinez sat across from me, her face carefully neutral as she reviewed the devastation of my financial life spread across her desk. Every document told the same story: debt, fraud, ruin. Mrs. Morrison, she said finally, setting down the papers. I'll be honest with you, this is one of the worst cases of financial abuse I've seen. Your husband was very thorough. I laughed bitterly. That's one word for it. The forged signatures, the identity theft, the fraudulent business accounts, these are criminal matters, but prosecuting him won't erase the debt. Many of these creditors will still come after you. How much? I asked, though I already knew it would be catastrophic. She calculated quietly. Between the credit cards, personal loans, business loans, the mortgage on the house you didn't know he took out, and the tax liability from the retirement account withdrawal, you're looking at approximately $740,000 in debt. $740,000. The number was so absurd I couldn't even process it. I had worked since I was 16 years old, saved every penny, lived frugally, and this was where it had led me. I recommend bankruptcy, Susan continued. Chapter 7. You'll lose the house, the car, any remaining assets, but you'll be able to discharge most of the unsecured debt. Most? The tax debt from the retirement withdrawal will remain, and any debts the court determines were obtained through fraud that benefited you could be excluded. Your husband's lawyer will argue you knew about and benefited from the money. His lawyer. I shook my head. How does he even have a lawyer? He doesn't have any money. Susan's expression was sympathetic. He has your money, Mrs. Morrison, and I suspect he's hidden more than you realize. She was right. As the divorce proceedings began, it became clear that John had been preparing for this day for years. Money had been siphoned into accounts I couldn't trace. Assets had been transferred to friends and family members. He had even sold my grandmother's jewelry, pieces I thought were safely in our deposit box, and pocketed the cash. The legal battles were brutal. John's lawyer painted me exactly as John had promised, as an unstable woman who had made bad financial decisions and was now trying to blame her husband. They produced emails I had supposedly sent agreeing to loans, voice recordings of phone calls I didn't remember making, documents with signatures that looked like mine but that I swore I hadn't signed. She's clearly suffering from memory issues, John's lawyer argued in court. Perhaps early-onset dementia. My client has been trying to manage their finances despite his wife's erratic behavior. I wanted to scream, to rage, to make everyone see the truth. But my lawyer had coached me to remain calm. Every emotional outburst would be used as evidence of my instability. The divorce took 18 months. 18 months of court dates, depositions, and character assassination. John showed up to every hearing in expensive suits I had unknowingly paid for, looking every inch the successful businessman wronged by his crazy wife. I showed up in the same black dress each time, the only court-appropriate clothing I hadn't sold to pay for lawyers. During those months, I lived in a studio apartment in the worst part of town. 400 square feet with bars on the windows and neighbors who screamed at each other through thin walls. After the house I had bought with my own money, maintained with my own money, and lost to John's secret mortgage, it was all I could afford. I worked 3 jobs. My regular position at the law firm during the day, cleaning offices at night, and stocking shelves at a grocery store on weekends. Every penny went to survival and legal fees. I ate ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches. I walked everywhere because I couldn't afford gas. I learned that rock bottom has a basement and that basement has a subfloor. But I survived. The day the divorce was finalized, I didn't feel victorious. John had managed to shift enough blame that the debt was split between us, leaving me with over $300,000 to my name. The bankruptcy discharged some of it, but I was still left with a mountain of tax debt and certain secured loans the court wouldn't dismiss. John walked away relatively unscathed. The criminal charges I had filed were eventually dropped due to insufficient evidence. He had been too careful, too clever. The prosecutor said that while they believed my story, proving it beyond reasonable doubt would be nearly impossible. "I'm sorry," the young district attorney had said. "Financial abuse cases are incredibly difficult to prosecute, especially when the perpetrator is this sophisticated." Sophisticated, another word for the man who had destroyed me. But here's the thing about destruction. Sometimes, when everything is burned to the ground, you can finally see clearly. No more illusions, no more false hope, just the bare truth of who you are and what you're capable of surviving. I was 57 years old, bankrupt, alone, and starting over with less than nothing. But I was free from the constant gaslighting, free from the emotional manipulation, free from the fear of what new financial disaster John would create next. The first year after the divorce was the hardest. I moved to a different city where no one knew my story. Found a small apartment that wasn't much better than the studio, but felt like a palace because John had never been there. Got a job as a bookkeeper for a small company that didn't care about my credit history as long as I could do the work. I went to therapy, though I could barely afford it. Learned terms like narcissistic abuse and financial coercion and trauma bonding. Put names to what had been done to me. Understood finally that it wasn't my fault, that loving someone, trusting someone, didn't make me stupid, it made me human. Slowly, painfully, I began to rebuild, not just financially, though every extra dollar went toward paying down the tax debt, but emotionally, spiritually. I learned to trust my own judgment again, to believe my own memories, to stop apologizing for existing. I made friends at work, joined a support group for survivors of domestic abuse. Yes, domestic abuse, because that's what it was, even if he never laid a hand on me. The bruises were on my credit report instead of my skin, but they were just as real. 5 years after the divorce, I had paid off half the tax debt. I had a small savings account again, just $1,000, but it was mine. I had furniture from thrift stores and dishes from garage sales, but they were chosen by me, paid for by me, cherished by me. I even went on a date. Just coffee with a nice man from my support group who understood why I insisted on separate checks. It didn't lead anywhere, but it reminded me that I could still feel something other than fear when a man smiled at me. Recovery isn't a straight line. There are days when I wake up in a panic, certain I'll find my bank account drained again. Nights when I dream about John's cold smile as he told me I was worth more dead than alive. Moments when I see a couple sharing finances and want to scream at them to run. But there are more good days than bad now. Days when I feel proud of what I've survived, grateful for the strength I found in the ashes of my former life, even hopeful about the future, limited though it may be. I'm 62 now. I'll never retire. The financial damage was too complete for that. But I'm free. I'm whole. I'm here. And that's more than John thought I would be. The day I became a grandmother was the day I truly understood that John hadn't taken everything from me after all. My daughter Sarah, born from my first marriage before John, placed her newborn son in my arms, and I wept. Not from sadness, but from the realization that love still existed in my world. Pure, untainted love that had nothing to do with money or manipulation or fear. "Mom," Sarah said softly, watching me hold baby Michael, "you're going to be an amazing grandmother." I had hidden the worst of my story from Sarah for years, too ashamed to admit how completely I had been fooled. But children have a way of knowing when their parents are drowning, even when we think we're hiding it well. She had watched me age 20 years in 5, seen me go from a confident professional to a shell of myself, witnessed the bankruptcy, the moves, the 3 jobs that left me exhausted. "I'm sorry," I whispered to her, still looking at Michael's perfect face. "I'm sorry I can't give him the things a grandmother should. No college fund, no savings bonds, no inheritance except debt and cautionary tales." Sarah took my hand. "Mom, you're giving him something more valuable. You're showing him what survival looks like, what strength looks like, what it means to rebuild after someone tries to destroy you." That conversation changed something in me. For years, I had seen myself through John's lens, as a failure, a fool, a woman too stupid to protect herself. But Sarah saw something different. She saw a survivor, a warrior, a woman who had been knocked down to nothing and still found a way to stand. I started writing my story down, not for publication or profit, but for Michael and any other grandchildren who might come. They deserved to know the truth, to understand why Grandma lived in a tiny apartment and worked at 70, to learn the warning signs I had missed, to know that wolves sometimes come dressed as sheep, speaking words of love while planning your destruction. The writing was therapeutic in ways I hadn't expected. Putting it all down on paper, I could finally see the patterns clearly. The love bombing in the beginning, the gradual isolation from friends who might have warned me, the financial boundaries crossed one by one until there were no boundaries left, the gaslighting that made me question my own reality. I joined an online forum for survivors of financial abuse, found thousands of stories like mine, men and women who had been systematically drained by partners who saw them not as people, but as resources. The patterns were so similar it was eerie. The same tactics, the same excuses, the same devastating aftermath. I started sharing my story there, and the responses overwhelmed me. This could have been me. This was me. Thank you for helping me see what's happening in my own marriage. For the first time since John, I felt useful. My pain had a purpose. My story could be someone else's warning. At 65, I was still working full-time as a bookkeeper, but I had achieved something I once thought impossible. The tax debt was paid off. It had taken 8 years of every spare penny, of choosing generic groceries and walking instead of driving, of wearing the same clothes until they fell apart. But it was done. I was no longer paying for John's crimes. I celebrated alone in my apartment with a cup of tea and a grocery store cupcake. It wasn't the retirement celebration I had once imagined, but it was mine. Earned with my own labor, paid for with my own money, enjoyed in my own space where no one could take it from me. The nightmares had mostly stopped by then. Therapy had helped, as had time and distance. But occasionally, I would wake in a cold sweat, certain I would find my bank account empty, my identity stolen again, my life in ruins. On those nights, I would get up and check every account, verify every balance, reassure myself that John was truly gone. He had remarried, I learned through the grapevine, found another woman with a good job and a trusting heart. I wanted to warn her, but knew she wouldn't listen. No one wants to believe the person they love is capable of such calculated cruelty. She would have to learn the way I did. I prayed she would survive it better than I had. My relationship with money remained complicated. I hoarded cash in hidden places around my apartment, unable to fully trust banks, even though I knew it was irrational. I checked my credit report obsessively, looking for accounts I didn't open, loans I didn't take. I could barely stand to watch romantic movies where couples blithely shared finances, wanted to scream at the screen about the danger they were in. But slowly, I was learning to live with the scars, to accept that some wounds never fully heal, they just become part of who you are. My poverty wasn't a character flaw. My inability to trust wasn't weakness. They were battle scars from a war I hadn't chosen but had survived. At 70, I finally did something I had been too afraid to do for years. I went back to school, not for a degree or career advancement. It was far too late for that, but for the joy of learning. Community college courses in literature and history, subjects I had loved before John convinced me they were wastes of time and money. I sat in classrooms with people young enough to be my grandchildren, taking notes with hands that had once signed away my future. Some of them probably wondered what I was doing there, this old woman with her second-hand textbooks and careful budgeting of every campus coffee purchase. But I didn't care. I was reclaiming pieces of myself that John had stolen along with my money. The day I turned 75, Sarah threw me a small party, just family and a few friends from my support group. No fancy restaurant or expensive gifts. We had potluck in the community room of my apartment building, and it was perfect. "I want to make a toast," Sarah said, raising her glass of punch, "to my mother, who taught me that sometimes the greatest victory isn't in never falling down. It's in getting up one more time than you're knocked down." I looked around that room at the faces of people who knew my story and loved me anyway, who saw my tiny apartment and second-hand clothes and didn't judge, who understood that wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in the courage to keep going when everything was lost. John had taken my money, my credit, my retirement, my faith in love, but he hadn't taken my ability to feel joy in small things, to find meaning in survival, to discover that rock bottom could be a foundation to build on, even if what you built was modest and came too late for conventional success. I'm 78 now, still working part-time because Social Security isn't enough to live on when you've had to start over at 57. My apartment is still small, my clothes are still from thrift stores. I'll never travel the world or leave an inheritance or have the golden retirement I once saved for. But I have something John never understood the value of. I have peace. I have truth. I have the knowledge that every single thing in my life, however humble, was earned by me, chosen by me, and can't be taken from me by someone who claims to love me while planning my destruction. And on quiet evenings, when I sit with my journal and write more of my story for my grandchildren, I sometimes feel something I thought John had killed forever. I feel grateful, not for what happened, never for that, but for surviving it, for learning that I was stronger than I knew, for discovering that a life rebuilt from ashes might be smaller than the one that burned, but it's also more honest, more real, more genuinely mine. John thought he destroyed me, but all he really did was show me that I was indestructible, and that perhaps is the greatest victory of all. Maybe your partner gets angry when you ask about money. Maybe they make you feel guilty for wanting to see bank statements. Maybe they've convinced you that your concerns about missing funds are signs of your own instability. Maybe they've isolated you from friends and family who might notice the red flags you've been trained to ignore. I spent years believing I was the problem, that if I just trusted more, supported better, worked harder, everything would be fine. But here's what I learned too late. When someone truly loves you, they don't make you feel crazy for wanting financial transparency. They don't guilt you into giving them money. They don't forge your signature or steal your identity or drain your retirement account while telling you it's for your own good. Love doesn't look like manipulation. Partnership doesn't mean one person taking while the other gives until there's nothing left. Trust isn't blind faith in someone who has proven themselves untrustworthy. If you're in this situation now, please hear me. It will not get better. They will not change. That next business venture won't be the one that finally works. The debts won't magically disappear. The person who claims to love you while destroying your future will not suddenly develop a conscience. I know leaving seems impossible. Where will you go with no money? How will you survive with destroyed credit? Who will believe you when they're so charming to everyone else? These are the chains that keep us trapped, the fears that parasites like John count on. But I promise you this: however hard it is to leave, staying is harder. Poverty with peace is better than wealth with constant fear. A tiny apartment where you feel safe is better than a house where you're being slowly destroyed. Being alone is better than being with someone who sees you as nothing more than a resource to exploit. Start documenting everything. Keep records they don't know about. Tell someone you trust what's happening. Contact a domestic violence hotline, because yes, financial abuse is domestic violence. Make a plan, and when you're ready, run. Run and don't look back, no matter how much they promise to change. You might lose everything in the process. I did. But you'll gain something worth more than any amount of money. You'll gain yourself back. And to those who love someone in this situation, please don't give up on them. They may not be ready to hear the truth. They may defend their abuser and push you away. But keep being there. Keep offering support without judgment. Because when they finally see through the lies, they'll need someone who believes them. Financial abuse thrives in silence and shame. By sharing my story, I hope to break that silence, to shine a light on the tactics these predators use, to help even one person recognize the danger before it's too late. My name is Evelyn Morrison. I am 78 years old. I was financially abused by my husband for 15 years. I lost everything, but I survived. And if you're reading this, you can survive too.